So what's your response to this morning, first of all?
Well, it's been really interesting following it, and I'm so glad that you guys are tracking this. I actually just got back from about an hour ago. We wrapped up a press conference here in Bonn, just upstairs, with two representatives from the Association of Small Island States, and Ambassador Jumeau from the Seychelles really gave a rundown for the press and for the people there about what happened this morning, which you all have covered, but a little bit more about what he thought the significance of all of this was. And I think that his thinking really lines up with where we see it as well, which was that this morning was really significant, and last night as the debate was happening there, because it allowed the vulnerable countries, and especially the island nations, to bring up the latest science in this forum. We've seen since Copenhagen and in Copenhagen these scientific targets that the majority of scientists now support, the public now supports, continually be stripped out of the text. By Copenhagen, we had 112 countries that supported a 1.5 degree and then a 350 parts per million CO2 concentration targets, and yet those targets were basically taken out of the agreement in Copenhagen, and all that we got was a very small reference to 1.5 in the Copenhagen Accord. So to be able to bring these issues up again here in Bonn, even in this small way of a technical paper, is a way for these countries to really articulate the fact that they're still facing these challenges and still want these targets to be on the table. So from the ambassador's perspective and from ours, it's a shame and really a tragedy that this isn't moving faster, that this paper has been blocked, this review of the science, but it's still a good thing that it's being out there. And it's a good thing that these countries are finding support for that. And he expressed real determination to bring this to Cancun and bring this to the meetings that happen. And as he said, we're not going to let this go away. We've seen that there's broad support for a 1.5 and 350 target, and we're going to keep fighting for that as these talks go on.
And I guess we've spoken a lot about the countries that blocked this move. It's also interesting to look at the support that the small islands did have, because you had the US, Canada, countries which haven't always been kind of the most positive at these talks, backing a call for this paper. So that's that is a positive that we can take out of it. Here on OneClimate, we spoke to Bill Hare earlier in the week about the feasibility of reaching 1.5 and achieving 350, and he said economically it's possible, technologically it's possible, politically he seemed a little bit more apprehensive, and actually the tone that when he was talking to us, he seemed genuinely kind of concerned, these continual political setbacks and how long we can carry on doing this. And I guess today, especially the way that these countries went about blocking this paper, this isn't a proposal even, this is simply a technical paper, and they blocked it, and also the tactics used. I think Saudi Arabia at one point suggested that if the countries wanted to find out about the impacts of 1.5, they could search for the results on Google or something, which it's not really it doesn't set a progressive agenda here. So are you concerned? Your campaign has been mobilising for this for a couple of years now, really a huge international campaign, and yet still there doesn't seem to be the political will. How are we going to bring that about?
Well, I think that there's a couple different aspects to that question, and I guess how does the saying go? First they ignore you, then they fight you. So I think that we're really making progress, and it's important to note that the Saudis were really standing alone on this. I mean, and the fact that they didn't have any good argument to bring forward, and that was actually one of the parts that was happening in SEBSTA, was countries were asking the Saudis, what is your argument? Why not? And they really didn't. They mumbled something about rice exports or really oil exports, and they don't have an argument to not have this happen, not go forward. So I think that while they were able to block it because of the procedural rules of the UN, I think that they will come under increasing public pressure to really allow something to move forward. But I think that what Bill was touching on is, the problem with climate change and the great challenge in general, which is how can we summon the necessary political will to deal with something as complex and as large as the climate crisis? And how do we come up against, the richest industries in the world, the oil industry that made more money than in the history of money last year. How do we come up against these powers and really create a strong deal that meets what science says is necessary? And I think that we're beginning to see a little bit of that. I mean, not to say that the road we walk isn't going to be hard, not to say that, progress is going to be easy, but I think what's happening now in the last few years First, all the public mobilization leading up to Copenhagen, now the outrage about the BP oil spill and what's happening there. People are beginning to mobilize, and I think that Copenhagen was a setback, but what we've seen here in Bonn is that the small island countries, the nations here, they aren't giving up the fight. They know that their survival is at stake, really, and that as advocates, it's our job to show that solidarity and to continue to provide them a real backing of public support.
Well, you mentioned the BP oil spill there, and of course, we've seen the role of oil blocking progress here today, and yet actually this horrendous spill in America. Perhaps there's a chance that a small silver lining in this. And is there any hope that it'll open a political space for this kind of discussion and this kind of movement? I don't think people are explicitly drawing the link between Bonn and the Gulf. Certainly not in the US press, as far as I've seen. But can this be something that activists can really work to create?
I think definitely, and I think that's beginning to happen here. But you're right, I think the press hasn't done a good job of making that connection. They're much more interested in top kills and junk shots than they are in the connection with climate change and the real solution here to the oil spill, which is an aggressive policy moving away from dirty fossil fuels. A little of that is coming out. In the U.S. right now, there's debate happening in the Senate about the role of the Environmental Protection Agency to be able to regulate greenhouse gases. That's going to bring this climate issue back to the fore this week. And I think that President Obama is under increasing pressure to come up with a plan that can really move the country forward. And I think, he is involving climate. He should be doing more. He's definitely not doing enough, but he's beginning to make that move. And so I think that we're trying our best to make the connection. Just this morning there was a big oil action outside that I think you guys might have been filming as well. And people here really know that it's happening, but we need the public to be constantly getting the message out that these problems are completely connected, that the solutions are connected, and that the movement that's building up around the oil spill is also really pushing forums like what's happening here in Bonn, and will continue to push for the international solutions that a process like this can create to really cut back on our dependence on oil in general and move us towards that clean energy future that we hear so much talk about, but hope to see a bit more action on moving.
And am I right in saying that 350 has just organised a huge action in the US on the oil spill? Can you maybe give us a little bit of feedback there? What happened?
Yeah, sure. So, we've been doing a lot of work around this. It actually started a bit of a surprise for us. We started just a Facebook group, a couple of our staff kind of on our spare time against Obama's plan to increase offshore drilling about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. And, it just grew like wildfire. And then the oil spill happened and it grew even larger. And now there's something like 150,000 people on the group or something like that. We've gotten, I think, about 50,000 new email addresses in the last month, just building up pressure around this issue. So it's really taken on a life of its own. And I think that we've seen, the connection between the oil spill and what's happening, and really seen it by working on the oil spill and giving people an outlet to really effectively make their voices heard on that, we can connect people in with this broader climate movement as well. So we see a lot of momentum there. And I think that as we move forward with our campaign this year to organize this big global work party on 10-10-10 and try and show the solutions to climate change, a lot of this feeling that we need to move away from fossil fuels, we need to be showing the alternatives that are out there, that feeling is really going to feed into that movement. And hopefully before Cancun, we'll be able to have transferred a lot of this excitement about oil and not just let it fizzle on, a couple, slamming BP with a couple taxes or, a few new regulations. That would be letting them completely off the hook. That's what BP wants, a couple $1 billion worth of fines and a couple new safety regulations. What they don't want is strong climate action. What they don't want is for this disaster to be a wake-up call for everybody. So I think that's our job, and that's the public's job, is to continue to put the pressure on. Don't let this just be about one oil spill. Make this about the larger problem at hand and the real need for an international treaty.
And you say that BP don't want strong climate action. The fact that there's a number of BP lobbyists here.
Right, I know, we haven't seen them yet. But we saw on the list that there are some BP lobbyists walking around here. But I think that, the thing to remember is that this isn't happening out in the open. The BP lobbyist doesn't need to be walking around like we do, trying to chase down delegates and hand them information. They're really working it behind the scenes, which is why it's so important to bring these issues out into the open, and why it's important that countries like AOSIS and Grenada, who are bringing up this 1.5 target in the latest science, weren't just doing it behind closed doors, but we're taking the risk to really do it on a public stage and say, we want a public dialogue about this. We don't want this to just be some bilaterals, up in the Hotel de Maritime. We want this to be a public issue, and we want the public to be involved in supporting us as we go forward.
I think we can safely assume that the BP lobbyists aren't staying in a hostel in town.